Hey, Jess, you've been covering this for so long. You had a column last week. It really struck a nerve with us all in The Guardian, where when you hear these words about societal change and respect and teaching boys to treat women differently, that for you, that's not going to cut it.
Look, I just think that this is long-term work. It's also quite experimental. We don't actually know if our efforts to change cultural attitudes will work. We've had, since 2017, the last National Community Attitude Survey was in 2021. We saw that since 2017, improvement to attitudes on domestic violence have stalled. There's been tens of millions of dollars invested in this approach over that period. I think that there's what I'm concerned about when we talk about cultural change and the need for everybody's got a role to play is that it means that nobody is directly responsible. Because yes, I agree, everyone does have a role to play. I play that role every single day, and I talk to other people about what they can do within their communities, within their families and within their friend groups, especially when they see the signs of coercive control or they hear about sexual violence. But really, what we do is when we focus on that as the primary method of prevention, as we do nationally, we're basically saying we're going to outsource these results to future generations, and we're not talking about the things that we can do now, the industries, for example, that are exacerbating this violence. What are the levers that government can pull on mainstream porn and the access that young kids have to that unfettered? What can they do about the intersection between problem gambling and family violence? What can they do about alcohol? What can they do about social media? So to be really specific, the E-Safety Commissioner presented to government a plan for age verification limits on mainstream porn sites. Now, the government did not decide to pursue that. These are the sorts of things that I and so many others want to see actioned, because what we're seeing in the front line across the country, and I travel relentlessly around this country talking about this, what I'm hearing from the front line is that they are seeing more and more complex cases of sexual violence, of coercive control, and they are absolutely clear about the connection between these harmful industries and the increased severity and complexity they're seeing.
So rather than the platitudes, taking action on the porn sites, the gambling, the access that kids are getting and young men are getting to that is something that can be done right now.
Absolutely. And to be honest, when we have a run of homicides, and the first sort of response often from government, from prevention agencies, is we need to talk about disrespect, we need to have fathers have better conversations with their sons. I want us to think about what kind of families do we have in Australia? Because we don't just have some blank slate where there's just all these excellent fathers with all the ideas about how to speak well to their sons. 1 in 4 kids in South Australia have been subject to a child protection report. The family is where a lot of these messages are being passed down to children. And so another part of what we're trying to say is we need to be working much harder on accessing and doing better with those kids, not just putting the responsibility on individual fathers, though those who have the capacity to do that, I absolutely urge them to have those conversations. But we should be looking at how do we help children recover from abuse, from neglect, from coercive control. At the moment, frontline services often just aren't resourced to work directly with children. And they're desperate for that resourcing, and the kids deserve that. And this is what we're talking about, breaking an intergenerational cycle of violence. You need to get to kids when they're coming out of these situations and help them reach their full potential, help them deal with what they've just been through.
Jess, as we're heading into budget time, just finally I want to ask you about the impact, and we spoke to Sally McManus about this earlier on the program, the impact of the inequality of money and how that is moving through this problem.
I totally agree.
What do we do? What do we do there?
So I think everything we can do around economic inequality is directly helpful. One thing that the government did, and the government has been doing things, I just want to say that from the outset, this is not an area of total inaction, but recently the government restored the single parenting payment, for example, from where it had been for single parents with children under 8 to now single parents with children up to 14. Now, they didn't put it back to 16, which is what it was under Whitlam. But, you know, when we have single parents, the 60% of whom are survivors of domestic violence, 50% of those who have been living in poverty with their children, there are certain levers that can be pulled to be actually helping the families who are at most risk of future violence, who are having to deal with the impact of violence, and economic levers are really critical to that.